Great. Well, hello. Here we are with our two conservators, Gianfranco Pocobene and Siobhan Lindsay. And they've been really gracious enough to talk to us today about their work at the mansion. And without further ado, I will introduce them both and ask them both to give us a bio about how on earth they ended up in this field and why. So, Gianfranco, would you like to start?
Sure. So I'm a graduate of the Master of Art Conservation program at Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. And it's a 2-year program that, trains people to become conservators. A lot of science, a lot of lab work, and a lot of ethics and principles of what we do. Before that, I actually have a degree also in a BA in studio art and art history. And I think the reason I actually ended up getting into conservation is that when I was in undergraduate doing painting, I realized I wasn't going to become an artist for all sorts of reasons. And in my background, because I was actually originally born in Italy, but I traveled a lot there when I was quite young with my parents, and they weren't into art necessarily, but we would end up in either museums or churches, and there was always like scaffolding up where they were doing restoration of murals. And it was always something in the back of my mind. And then, once I got into, my graduate studies, I realized that's what I wanted to do. So here I am. And here we are like 34 years later or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Siobhan?
So I came about it a little bit more from sort of a piecemeal, I guess we can say, way. I became interested in art conservation when I studied abroad in college. I did a experiential learning program in Italy, in Siena and Florence, and it was around the time of the Sistine Chapel being that whole Nippon television conservation treatment was sort of underway, and nobody could see it, and all of these things. So I spent my month in Florence. At the end of the program, you choose a subject and you write a big paper. You research and you write a big paper, and I chose fresco restoration, and I studied with this wonderful expat who married an Italian in Florence, and she brought me everywhere. She brought me to all of the conservation studios in Florence and sent me to, Rome, and she had me all over the place, and it was really exciting. And so that was kind of what piqued my interest to the point where I had to transfer colleges. And then I majored in art history, and I minored in chemistry. And then I went back to Italy. So I continued to keep spending time in Italy. I went and learned how to make a fresco and studied high Renaissance art. And, I just sort of kept going back and forth. And then I came upon these wonderful mentors. I was very lucky and fortunate to have a position at the Gardner, and literally dusting the Gardner. That was my first job in conservation. Was on Mondays when the museum was closed, I would go in and we would literally dust top to bottom every room, learning how to handle furniture and doing all of those things, including Gianfranco handing me a Rembrandt self-portrait and saying, "Here, hold this." So it started there, and I was in the objects lab actually, and then Gianfranco came on and took over the conservation department at the head of the conservation department. He was a paintings conservator, and he had done the survey at the mansion earlier in his career or his in his studies. And he said, "Oh, I've got this interesting job. Yeah, I've got this job up in Maine." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm from Maine." And he said, "Well, on Fridays, I'm going to be working up there if you want to come." And so this was the Turkish smoking room. So I, did a little foray into paintings conservation, and we can sort of see where that's ended up, 10, 15 years later here. so it was sort of, I had a great objects mentor in Valentine, and then I had a great paintings, mentor in Gianfranco, and I actually did textiles with Deirdre Windsor down in Dover, Mass for a while. So I got all these like pieces of conservation, that I learned. And the mansion is kind of the perfect receptacle for all of those skills that I have. Certainly the walls, because that's a very specific, treat those, the way we work with that is very specific. But so is when I clean the gasolier, or when I clean and create carpets pads for the carpeting. It's, it's just one more piece of all those little threads that I have. So I just keep learning and meeting great people like you, and so no formal master's education at all, but a lot of life experience and work experience and hands-on experience, which have really sort of brought me to where I am right now.
Yeah, like the perfect sorcerer's apprentice, really. So you started actually the Turkish smoking room in 2007. So I was curious with both of you. You've worked now through, this is your 5th room, and I was saying to Gianfranco that often when I'm leading tours, I'll talk to guests as though that the house were a unicorn or some fabled beast that somehow shouldn't exist but does, and it's extraordinary and magical and absolutely unique. So I'd love to see what both of you think of Victoria Mansion as the exterior, of course, but the interior. Why is this such an extraordinary, once in a lifetime experience, really, to visit?
Well, I guess I'll start just to get the conversation going. Well, it really is the pinnacle of kind of decoration and craftsmanship of that period. I mean, there really is nothing like it from just the pre-Civil War period, and it's just an extraordinary story of this guy from Maine who ends up in New York and then New Orleans, and he builds this summer house, which all seems very magical in and of itself, never mind what they actually accomplished. And then having Herder and Guidicini, the painter, come in and put this all together. And, as I've often said, it's like, it's just this amazing thing where all these materials and design elements come together in this really fantastic way, but never garish, never, never visually disturbing. It's just always so crisp and clean and well thought out. And after all these years, I keep walking through the rooms and being amazed and discovering things that you didn't see the last time you were there, or thought you'd never seen before. So it is magical in that sense, that there's always something to discover there, even though it's been static for the last 160 years or whatever it is.
How about you, Siobhan?
Yeah, and when you approach the mansion and you're looking at its really sort of austere exterior, this dark kind of, spooky almost, facade, and then you walk in and it's just like this little jewel box. You walk in and these rich, beautiful jewel tones and gold everywhere, and the cohesiveness of those 3 sort of main people who really accomplished the whole sort of grand idea of what the mansion was going to be. And you have, of course, Henry Austin, but you have, Herder and Guidicini, and Herder's vision for how this was all going to unfold is really, remarkable. Each of those rooms sort of representing a different style and period of time, and how well he accomplished that feel, of a Gothic room or a Renaissance room, and really being able to keep it right in that little room, so that when you walk in, it's like you're walking into a different time, right? Mm-hmm. And that it is so well preserved. And there's a testament to how things were built, back then. It's built like a battleship, which is one of the reasons it's still there, that and not being torn down to make a gas station. But it's, every time I go in there, I'm amazed. And like Gianfranco said, every time I'm there, I see something else that I've missed, whether it's a a tassel or, you know, a motif in a corner, or, oh, that's silver leaf. I didn't even know that that was silver. You know, it's just, it goes on and on and on. And there's more to discover, which is, you know, kind of the nice part, is that it keeps giving back, which is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not one of those one and done visits, you know, you have to keep going back and see more and more. Well, what I'll do is I'm going to share my screen, and then we've got a number of photos of the pre-treatment of the parlor. So we'll focus on the parlor. As I said, you know, you've done 5. You did the Turkish smoking room, the Pompeian bathroom, the vestibule reception room, and then wham, we went right into the parlor. So let's go into the parlor. See. All right. So, and thank you for these photos that you took in preparation for the project. And I'm hoping this will now work. And it should work. I did set this up before, and there we go. There we go. All right. So I don't know if I've got a series, I think, of 6 slides of pre-treatment. I don't know if you guys want to just pile in and talk about each one.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we just step back a moment, you know, as you said, this is the 5th or 6th room that we're dealing with. And, you know, there's a kind of a consistency in many of the issues that we've had to address. You know, there's, as we'll go through it, there's generally this huge, you know, big buildup of soot and grime, much of it dating back to the 19th century in places. And, you know, areas of some surfaces, like some of the gilding, some of the paint, which is unstable. But generally, it's remarkably well preserved. It's incredibly well preserved, actually, when you think of how many decades this has gone through and the potential for damage. I mean, the first thing that everybody should be aware of is that the walls are painted in a water-based paint, which is readily soluble. It looks like from our research and technical studies that we've done that they did incorporate some oil into the paint, which would have created an emulsion, which makes it a little more stable and a little more not easily disturbed, especially when they were actually executing the paint on the walls. You can imagine they would have painted the field colors. And then the next day they have to go back in and put stripes and whatever other borders they're doing on that. And if it was strictly water-based paint, when they're applying that, it would start dissolving what's underneath it. So this oil paint, this oil emulsion with water, like an animal glue, would have made it much more resilient to that kind of additional work that they were putting on top of it. But as we know, you know, from our work on it, it's a surface that can be easily damaged. And I think the big takeaway is that it's amazing how everything is just still there, essentially.
Yeah, and especially considering there were 5 children. The Libbies, did they have 3 or 5 children? There were 5 children who lived in that house at one point. How are they not scratched and just gouged or, you know, painted like little kids painting on the wall, you know, like my kids used to do? I can't believe the state of the house, considering it had, you know, children there for many years.
Yeah, and then also, you know, a hurricane
Yeah,
through the roof and all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
yes.
The north, looking out, I guess, towards that back porch and then up the hill.
Yeah, and again, this kind of just shows just the conditions. You know, as I said, everything is really well preserved, but there is a veil of dust and grime and kind of this, you know, grayness to a lot of the surfaces, which is to be expected. And I think they learned pretty early on that if you tried to clean these things, you were going to lose much of the paint. So it was, you know, for the most part, most of the rooms is hands off. Although this room, Siobhan, we did have some issues where, and we'll get to that when we go further into the slides or the other images, but there are areas where you can see somebody was trying to like wipe things down a little bit. But again, all in all, it's just amazing. It's all there.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Gianfranco is saying, especially in this room, I feel more than sort of any of the other rooms that we have worked in, you know, the treatment in this room was really, the majority of it was the cleaning, because, you know, with emulsion paints, the way we clean these walls, it has to be a dry cleaning. So we're using synthetic sponges and vinyl erasers and literally manual and scalpels, manually, you know, removing this dirt. And because the walls were so light, you know, the dirt was even, you know, it made the cleaning even more intense, because to get down to the layer where it would all be sort of, it would look sort of cohesive and read correctly, you had to really get down through a lot of layers. And it's this very sticky, fine particulate coal dust, you know, this very fine layer. And once you wipe that off with the sponges, the synthetic sponges, you still have this embedded, you know, dirt layer beneath that you know, takes a lot of scrubbing with a vinyl eraser to get off. And because these walls were so light, it was very difficult to achieve an evenness, which I think we actually accomplished really well. And your glazes, Gianfranco, that you did for the overpainting are beautiful because they really do speak to that overall, you know, sort of field color that is the palette to this room. But I would say, you know, because all of the paint was most of it was very stable, except for some water damage in some areas, and then some settling issues. The paint itself was really, well, and then you also have the ochre paint, which we'll get to, and the gold, that was a little more fragile. And you're also dealing with sort of more three-dimensional surfaces and rounded surfaces where that paint just wants to pop when it gets dry and brittle and age and all that. So, but yeah, I mean, I think this was a little more tricky because it's sort of a gray on cream on, you know, palette, which is this very pale palette. And so that was the challenge, was I think really was the cleaning in this room. And it's a huge room, you know, people who haven't been there, this room is what, 20 by 24 with 15-foot ceilings. It's a huge room.
Yeah, and compared, say, to the Pompeian bathroom, which was very badly damaged, but you had those strident colors.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
that blue. And the red in there too. I spent 18 months in that bathroom. So I think I can say safely, I am the only human person who has spent that much time in that bathroom.
Yeah, there you go. And you had to reinstall the box, right, for the toilet.
Yeah.
Right, that's right. Well, when we did the actual water closet, I had to stand on a frame over the toilet because you couldn't fit more than one person in that space, and I had to clean up to the ceiling. So I was in the water closet for, you know, several weeks.
Wow. And then here, let's see. Oh, why is it? Come on. There we go. So this is the south elevation looking out towards Danforth Street. Again, I'm also struck by the light, the size of these windows, which were certainly not New England windows. Goodness, just the light. Did that make it easier? Was that natural light more helpful to in this restoration, given the color? Yeah.
Well, yeah, natural light helps with any conservation or restoration treatment you're doing. Even if you're sitting in front of an easel painting, you want to be by a window. Even if you know, I'm sure in when this was, you know, being used by the, you know, the original owners, you know, for the most part, a lot of the shades and everything would have been drawn because they understood that light would have damaged all their, you know, delicate fabrics and silk and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah, these windows really speak to grandeur. I mean, it's just, again, it's like, look at how big we can make these windows and look at the beautiful moldings that we can put around them. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. I'm actually looking at this picture and thinking about what Siobhan said about little children running around and nothing got knocked over somehow. I guess they were really well mannered that everything survived.
Yeah.
Better than mine. Better than my children. This would not still be intact if my children had gotten their hands on it.
Well, your children aren't also wearing that stiff collar and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
That's a good point too, though. You know, this room has a lot of windows. It's, you know, there are 6 floor to ceiling windows in this room, 4 of which are sliding pocket doors. And so there's actually less surface area to work with, because you're dealing with so many more windows than you are in most of the other rooms. And there was a lot of natural light, which was really helpful because of the challenges of the cleaning and trying to get them to get the cleaning even. It was really nice to have all that natural light. And before we even started our piece of the project, all of those windows were coated with a film to prevent the UV, they were UV protected. So, we felt like we were in this, like, you're in like a spotlight, right? You're like standing on the stage and the whole room's glowing. And
Yeah.
it was nice. It's almost a shame to put those beautiful chestnut shutters back on, but they've actually all been restored as well. So they will be back to protecting all of those silks once we get those all back in there as well.
Yeah, and it's cool to see it with them open, but they have to be closed.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so this was up in the ceiling, and I guess this was where there was the damage from the front of the house, I think, from the tower rather than the hurricane, but I think, right? So
Yeah, a lot of these damages, some of them you can actually find the source, there's the bathroom above or whatever. Some of these, and water has this amazing ability to just kind of travel down beams and walls, and you can't trace where exactly it came from. But it is indicative of, some of the other damages, like in the main entrance hall, this grand staircase that goes up, there are areas where there's clearly been water infiltration. So this was not an unexpected thing. I mean, it's not every room has this, but we've seen this in other rooms. And basically what's gone on here, the water's percolated through the structure of the building. And then it as it travels through the materials, the wood, the plaster, it dissolves certain components of those materials, and it comes out as these stains that settle on the surface of the paint. And in this case, what we're looking at is an area where there had been water damage, and the main field of that large portion of the ceiling within the decorative border was overpainted. They were, we don't know exactly what year, but somebody went up there with a can of paint and unfortunately what they were doing, and they had no other way of doing it, but they were probably matching the dirty walls and ceiling in terms of what they did. And so there was a mismatch right off the bat, and whatever they used also, probably aged in a way that was not, the way you would like it to age. And in fact, on the far left, you can see just before you get to those white scrolls, you can see a little thin band of gray. And that actually is the original surface. They didn't quite go up to the edges in places.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of areas where we could identify the original surface. But the big problem with these areas was that they were painted over with a water-soluble paint on top of water-soluble paint. So you can't remove it. If you try to do that, you just make it just becomes like a slurry of, beige, muddy paint. So, it just had to stay where it was until we did the actual restoration.
And that's going to be
right there. Yeah.
And that's going to be the challenge in the master bedroom up on the second floor, right?
A lot of problems just like that also. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, so
I think those campaigns were probably around the same time. I feel like whatever they did in the parlor, they were doing the green bedroom. They sort of did that same thing at the same time. And just to add on to what Gianfranco was saying, when they do these things, like I feel like there are a couple different campaigns in the parlor to clean it. And one, I think they used sort of like a wet rag or whatever, and they were raking, something across the surface. So you can see these big smear sort of strokes, right? And then you have this overpaint campaign, the overpaint campaign. And once you do that, you're moving the dirt around on the surface of the paint, and the water and the dirt and the paint all become part of the fabric of the wall. So, like Gianfranco said, you can't remove that. They're all part of each other now. So, this would be an example of where we would, clean and then protect, and then there would be an overpaint. There would be a wash or over just to sort of match it more to that gray color. And like Gianfranco said, thankfully there were areas where we had very true original surfaces. So we just used those as to dictate sort of how we went with our palette.
Yeah, I think this is a great slide too, because you really see this amazing trompe-l'oeil.
Yeah.
It's just extraordinary. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the little vines they wove through the holes in the, it's just,
love that whimsical sort of, here.
you know, every time there looks to be a hole, they've got a little vine or a little flower sort of, you know, woven through. It's so pretty and it's so delicate. And you get up close to those colors and they're translucent. They're, you know, they're just like thin little washes that have been applied whimsically and not with much plan. They're just kind of like dotted in there, and it's really it's special. They were having fun with it, you know.
Yeah, actually, and that's something to say, you know, for as much as there was clearly a lot of design planning of what exactly the motifs were going to be and what sort of style or period they were going to, you know, mimic or replicate. There, in every room, there is an element of a kind of a freedom where, you know, they just take off with it and just start being very playful. I mean, there wasn't a drawing for those vines to go there. They're executing that on the spot, and whatever strikes them. And in fact, I'm surprised that we didn't see any like little bugs crawling out of those holes, did we? I mean, that would have been, they could have done that. You know, it's that kind of inventiveness and playfulness that they're just having a great time doing this. You can tell.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, is like this whole house, it's art, the marriage of art and craft, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's so cool. And here we have just a close-up of that, the corner here, and so you've got the wood, you've got the walls, and so on, which we can talk about again, this treatment of the wood and so on, and the different paints there. And this was the east wall, sort of backing into towards the hallway, and I guess this was where the dream was. Jacob's dream is on this side. Oh no, yes. this was So so you must have seen, was there coloration difference because the wall was protected by the painting, I'm assuming? And
yeah, and actually, and that the main field of that center panel it was repainted over it, and we think because of you know, with the painting hanging on there, it probably got scratched, you know, if they were taking it down. So that central field was, we know, had been reworked at some point. And there in the bottom left corner sort of quadrant, you can see that cleaning test. It's about a foot by a square foot there, which gives everybody a sense of, you know, the level of grime buildup and what we thought we could achieve with a cleaning of those surfaces. But again, it's a great picture because, as Siobhan was mentioning, it shows these very nuanced, subtle shifts in these beigey gray tones. You know, it looks pretty straightforward and simple. It's actually very sophisticated, just the way they're able to pull those surfaces in and out. You know, that's a flat wall except for the, you know, the trim, that's, you know, the wood trim, and yet they create this illusion of depth, you know, maybe an inch or two, but they're, you know, again, incredibly sophisticated workmanship.
So it's almost like the sort of mantegna, you know.
Yeah, it's just,
And where Giotto was amazing, the mantegna just took it to another whole level in frescoes. And I picked this one too because it's a close-up of, no, in England we call this the Pelmet Board, but I think it's the cornice would be the right term, right?
Yeah, that cobia, you know, and I gave you this slide because I think it was just one of these great ones that shows this beautiful, you know, sort of layering of, you know, what you would think, oh, this is just kind of neutral gray, beige kind of wall, kind of grayish wall, and then they set it off with this woodwork and this gilding and these fantastic sort of, you know, carvings, and it's indicative of what goes on everywhere throughout the mansion. You know, you could take a snapshot everywhere in every room, and you would get this kind of effect wherever you look.
Yeah, and you can see this again, this sort of scroll work that looks like 3D, and of course it's not.
I was going to say, this is actually a great image for, you know, the bulk of my cleaning sort of was spent in that cove. And if you see right above her head there, that's one of those sort of acanthus leaf scrolls. And those were a lot of work because they you know, have a lot of rounded surfaces. They're big. They're probably what, like a, I don't know, like maybe a foot.
Foot and a half, maybe, yeah, in places,
Yeah,
yeah.
and maybe a half a foot wide, and they have all sorts of little, you know, cutouts, and there's all sorts of little leaves and bumps, and then you have this wonderful design behind them, creating this other column type. I mean, I don't know exactly what they were trying to achieve back there, but it was sort of like they did this other little stylized acanthus leaf on a column behind the scroll in the cove. And as you go around the room, the shadow lines change on all of them. So you go from a dark and you walk around the room, and they'll slowly come back around to light. And it'll shift from being on the left-hand side to the right-hand side. And depending on which side of that acanthus leaf scroll, the big one, it will, the shadow from that will change how they've placed, you know, the darker and lighter colors next to it. It's, they were really just, they could see all of this without, and create it without using any sort of real guides, you know. But this took the majority of the work as well, because there's a lot of gilding or leaf on the scrolls, and you know, that was really the most unstable paint in the room. So it was, there was a lot of time spent up on the ceiling.
No, was Guidicini, did he do opera sets, or did I make that up?
No, that's true. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, I think, the bulk of his work after he came over from Italy and started, because, and you know, and that actually is a great connection, because if you think of theater or opera, these sets have to be painted really quickly. I mean, you don't have weeks and months to do this. You have to really, and so, you know, they were accomplished at being really skillful yet really efficient. And again, the mansion speaks to that kind of efficiency combined with, you know, the ultimate in skill. I mean, it's those two combinations.
Yeah. Because I think that when I talk about the mansion with guests, I'll say that it was really a performance. It was a stage. Each room was a stage for the homeowners to show wealth, training, and expertise, and all that sort of stuff. And I thought that was that lovely link that Guidicini did stage sets, opera sets, and here he is creating another stage. I thought this was so cool too, just the detail, you know, the masterfulness of this, simple brushstrokes, you know.
Yeah, really, really limited actually. When you start analyzing, it's like there's not a lot happening in terms of how many times they, but it's phenomenal. Again, what they could achieve with, you know, and that's what great painting is: minimal amount of, you know, work and maximum amount of effect. You know, it's really, you know, it's like any great painter, like Velasquez or whatever. You know, looks like they didn't do much to create it, and yet it just convinces you of what you're looking at, and it's really effective.
Yeah. And again, that play of light, you know, not only trompe l'oeil, but the physicalness of, as you were saying, Siobhan.
Yeah, and you know, and not a lot of stencils. You know, we didn't find a lot of evidence of using stencils. We've found in the reception room, we found some evidence of some stenciling, because you can see how the line around where the stencil is a little raised. And these don't have any of that. These are all really kind of freehand. And the neat thing about these is that they just took a brush and laid down a little sizing and then just pressed some gold leaf into it. They were just, again, doing these sort of whimsical little brush strokes and just kind of sticking the gold on. And so you can see where those losses are. You know, they were almost using the gold leaf as if it were on a paintbrush, right? They're just sort of like, oh, and there's an accent and there's a highlight, and you know, they're just sort of going along. And if you look, they all look very similar. They all look like almost they had, you know, this program. They're all sort of similar size and could really almost be stenciled, but they're certainly not. And it's just it's just so unique. You know, even in other rooms, it was surprising how free they were in this room using this.
Yeah, and this also sort of reminded me of the studiolo, which is all done with wood, right? That
Yeah.
wonderful dimensional thing. And here they're doing it with paint and gold leaf. It's pretty cool. So you had basically 3 goals, I guess, right? When you took this on, which was to stabilize and preserve the original decoration paint surfaces, to safely remove as you said, the discovering accumulations of grime and soot, and trim, and also to try and correct for any mismatching areas of old restoration. And then in paint, tone losses and abrasions in the original decorations to unify, or to bring it back to the unified form that it had. So then it's funny, I don't know why there it is. I found, as I was putting this together, I found this wonderful image. The Brits tend to, we seem to be confusing an awful lot of things at the moment, but this area I think is wit and art is somewhere that they do quite well. And this came from Fun magazine, and I loved it. And so the 3 quotes are this one here, the original designer. Yeah, here, that's my idea of something quite, something quite plain and simple. And then, fast forward, and I love the design of the outfit that the modern architect is wearing. I haven't seen you wearing those, Gianfranco, but
No.
yeah. There now, that's about the thing the original designer evidently intended. And then finally, here's the spirit, of the original builder, well, what strange things these moderns do design to be more. Quite original, though. And I guess there's also this connection that the Victorian Mansion is very much based on the European style books, Von Falk or Owen Jones or and so on that came over, and the relationship too with what was happening in England when Victoria and Albert were there, with the building of Osborne House and all that sort of importation. So I know it's an ongoing thing in England. And one of my questions was, you often talk about restoration versus conservation. Could you explain what the difference is? I mean, beyond just the words.
So it's a bit muddled because depending on what country or continent you're in, the terminology shifts slightly. So like in Great Britain, restoration tends to be they're picture restorers. That tends to be and in France too, or in Italy, that would be the terminology. In North America, we kind of, I think we must have taken a high horse or something at some point, because in many instances, as we look back on previous treatments, we realized that a lot of restorations were actually not a good thing. That people, like your little strip that you just showed, people did tend to get very carried away with restoration. It often meant actually that things got damaged during the process of cleaning. Over-cleaning happened a lot. So restoration, the word actually took on this kind of derogatory term, especially here in North America. So, basically the term conservation was kind of adopted as the general kind of term that we tend to use. But in reality, we do both things. They are different things, but they go hand in hand. And conservation is really about preservation, is that you take the original material and you do everything you can to preserve it. If there's a little flake of paint, you don't just wipe it off and repaint it. You actually readhere it and preserve as much of the original as possible. That's the true meaning of conservation. And that might also include things like climate control in a museum, because then you're extending the life of the object. The restoration part comes in because, well, things are damaged and there are missing elements and there are scratches or holes in a canvas or whatever the case may be. And especially with paintings and murals, there's been a tradition of restoring things to make them look visually appealing and coherent, which in a lot of other disciplines isn't necessarily the case. If you look at sculpture, they won't necessarily recarve an arm on an arm that's missing from a Greek sculpture. So, the different fields have different attitudes about this, but there is this history of restoring. So the critical thing about restoration is, though, that unlike in the past, we now use materials that are very stable. they're what we say reversible, so they're quite easily removed without doing damage to the original paint surfaces or whatever you're working on. And so in the future, they won't have to use really harsh solvents or materials to try to recover the original state of that object. So that's kind of the two sort of worlds that we straddle, and but they go in hand. And the Victorian mansion is a perfect example of that kind of situation where we're doing everything we can to preserve the original because that's what we should do and because it is so beautiful. But we do have to take into account that it's aged, things have happened to those surfaces, and we, with restoration that, or in painting and toning areas, we're trying to just bring back some coherence to that. But the bottom line is what we do is always interpretive. In many ways, conservators are interpreters, and working with curators or whoever else we're working with, we're not getting back to the original. We can't do that. Things have happened to that surface. The pigments have faded. There's been some loss. So it's a balance between all those things in, what the materials are, how they've aged, what effect time has had on it, and what can we do to bring some sort of order to the appearance of something.
Yeah, actually, because that was one of my next questions, was the role of interpretation versus cultural appropriateness, I guess, is Siobhan, do you have any thoughts on that, or what Gianfranco just said?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with them. I think, conservators are really problem solvers, and we have to take everything into consideration. It's really, it's a very thoughtful process, and I feel really lucky both at the Gardner and at the mansion that, this was the take that everyone has sort of agreed on, is that, we're going to do the best to preserve what is here, and we're going to have it read the way the artist originally intended it, but we're not going to remove original material, even if it's not looking exactly the way it was intended to look. And really the only time we're going back in and either reproducing something or overpainting something is a damage that we can't correct. And when we, when we remedy that, it's with a lot of thought of what materials we're going to use, how we're going to save, how to impact the surface the least, amount that we can do, and to accomplish kind of this nice kind of, surface that reads as the artist intended. So it's I've never, I think the only place I've been sort of pushed to do something where it wasn't in that vein was private work, where individuals decide, oh, I really do want that to look like it's brand new. I want you to clean it and paint it, and and I haven't had that experience in the mansion or museum setting, and I find it really more comforting as a conservator when people are taking that into consideration and making it really the point of what we're doing is the idea of saving and future generations being able to learn from, seeing the beauty of what is underneath all this grime, and to understand how it was intended to be presented.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just listed here some of the things that you've been just dealing with, and you've alluded to just, the idea of analysis. First of all, you had to see what's what, and then start to figure out how to remedy if it was a disfiguring restoration or just a damage, the grime and the soot, and the flaking that we've talked about, instability of the gold that we saw on that Pelmet board, whatever it is, over the curtains.
Yeah.
And I think Gianfranco, you had talked about emulsion versus distemper, and that whole question of, can we water base this, or is it a dry cleaning method, depending on the chemistry?
Yeah, and so really it's about, and fortunately at this stage, given that it's our fifth room, we have a pretty good sense of what the techniques were. they're pretty consistent. And again, given the short period of time they were working with, they weren't going to start experimenting with new paints or new ways of doing it. And they clearly had an understanding of how they were going to proceed with this. And I think what people don't realize also is that we think of them as artists and craftsmen, and there's this kind of like romantic notion that they're just like, you know, taking their time, and really, this was a business enterprise.
Yeah.
They were trying to make a living, and so this was not a place to get experimental with your materials and try something out that you didn't know how to do or hadn't tried before. So we're fortunate in the sense that we've had enough experience now throughout the mansion that we really have a pretty clear understanding of what most of the materials are. There are surprises every once in a while, but we have an expectation of what we're dealing with in terms of how we can approach different surfaces and how we can conserve them and restore them ultimately.
Because the whole house was built within 2 years, start to finish, to your point.
It's phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah. So Guidicini and his crew must have had what, a few months to paint.
Yeah, it's not months. Yeah, it's not much. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty
That's
pretty
right.
amazing. Yeah. Oops.
I always like to say I would love to have been a fly on the wall to see how they actually did this, how they pulled it off, because it's like,
So would I.
Yeah, and how did they work on the ceiling for that long? Like, were they Michelangelo style on their backs, or were they like us with our craned necks, sort of?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then of course you talked Siobhan about the different materials. You've got the walls, but then you've got those the inserts which are on canvas, and then you've got the gasolier. You've got all these different materials that you're trying to figure out what was the original, what is aging, and all that sort of stuff.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah. So let's pop on to, this was just another image, one of your
cleaning test. It's a cleaning test. Yeah, cleaning test. Yeah.
And then again, it brings out the depth of this trompe l'oeil marble, right? Is it like a Carrara marble or something like that?
Yeah, and actually, this is an area, and the data above it. These are executed originally. They were done in oil paint, so we actually are able to go on here with water-based cleaning solutions, unlike what we could do on the walls. So again, it's just understanding what you can work with and proceeding, with the treatment.
And caution.
Yeah, caution always. Yeah, that's always there. Yeah, but yeah, it's a nice dramatic image.
Yeah, that is. I love that. Yeah.
And you can see on the dado that there's a little cleaning test. See the little white on the yellow there, that little white square.
Right there, yeah.
Excuse me. There was overpaint, or we were doing a test to see how long it would take us to remove the varnish from the surface of the paint, or to see what the original color of the paint was. And so that was sort of what I was saying to you earlier, is, that was the original scheme. It was supposed to be white and they're clearly this creamy yellow now. And so we didn't take it down to that level. And when once the surface was cleaned, and as Gianfranco said, we could use solvents on this dirt, which was nice. But when we went to go tone that, we actually made that more yellow instead of bringing things back down to that white color, because it was going to be really difficult to remove the varnish, and not necessarily from that area, but all the roping around the windows with the gold leaf on the edges. That was going to be extremely difficult to remove the varnish layer without hurting the gold layer. And the gold layer was in such great condition and would be so much more expensive to replace these days, that all of these things go into this decision of, do we keep the incorrect color or do we bring it back to the original color? And our decision was to keep the original surface, because, as we were saying with Conservators, that's our general intent, is to maintain what was originally intended there, and to not make a 160-year-old house look like it's brand new.
Right.
Just one more add-on. The tricky thing with these coatings, these varnishes, is, yes, it's yellowed after all these years, but most of these varnishes from that period would have had a slight warm tone to them. It would have been clearer than what we're seeing here. And that's something we don't know. So even if you could go ahead and remove all this varnish safely, then you've got to put a coating back on there. Well, was it crystal clear? Was it slightly warm? And that's where it just becomes guesswork. And the default in this case, as Siobhan said, is to just, if it's basically still in really good condition, so let it be. It's fine.
Yeah, and varnishes must be different, right? What is a modern varnish compared to one that they'd have been using in 1858?
Very, very different. Very, very different. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So here's back to the ceiling again and our little whimsical vines. So
Beautiful.
this was a big discussion, right? I think you had in terms of where.
Yeah, it's again, as we'd said earlier, there was clearly a lot of water infiltration and damage, which led them to apply this repaint to the field, which mismatched, probably discolored over the years. We couldn't safely remove it without doing damage to what original there is there. And one of the things that we also think about when we're doing these treatments, instead of like trying to remove it and then ultimately making a mess of the situation, we always have to think to the possibility that in 100 years, there will be other ways of approaching this. And maybe just leaving that repaint on there isn't a bad thing, because there's a good chance they'll be able to deal with it, So instead of destroying it in the process of trying to get to the original, sometimes we step back and say, what, the future may well be able to take care of this better than we can. So you just have to know your place also in terms of your abilities and the technology we have. So, in this case, as Siobhan, I think, mentioned earlier on, this is a surface we could not recover. So it was surface cleaned. We applied a very stable resin varnish. It's not a varnish, well, it's a varnish, but it went on just to sort of stabilize the surface and create a bit of a barrier to our work. And then on the right-hand side, you can see in progress the tone of the, going in. And actually within the scroll work further towards the upper right there was a lot of the original paint that we could actually do color matching. And this paint is also, you can remove that paint quite easily from that surface if you wanted to, the work that, that we applied to that. But I think you can see on the right-hand side of that how that integrates with the border, the faux architectural sort of work there, and how it comes together quite beautifully. Really picks up.
Yeah, and I love the way the light catches way over. Whoops, I lost my little thing right here, where it looks as though it's painted to capture it's three-dimensional, so it's capturing the light, except it's
those gilded surfaces.
Exactly. Just amazing. Yeah.
But the important thing is that we actually spend a lot of time looking at the surface and trying to determine what the original surface was, and then our color matching goes from that.
Yeah. And here's that east wall again, and then the close-up of and I think you had said you'd have to go in the original artist would have gone in one day, laid down one thing, and then the next day gone in to do the different.
Yeah, so this is a detail just of that setting in that edge, and this is actually a photograph of Corinne Long, who's also been working on the project, worked on a number of the projects in the mansion, and so just basically going along the edge, setting that in, and then dealing with the rest of the border. But again, it's as we've been saying, after a lot of consideration and understanding of what color needs to go back in there to fit with the rest of the scheme.
Yeah, boy, what a steady hand. Holy mackerel. Yikes. Yeah. And then here again. So this is the cleaning with those latex sponges going down the different layers. Yeah. Yeah,
pretty self-explanatory. Just, there's a lot of grime on there. And as Siobhan said, just a lot of time to work through those, accumulations of dust and grime.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, this is beautiful.
And
then this is back to that border, that inner panel where the paintings hang, and just going in, and again, the paint is actually quite thin, so we're not trying to block it out and make it look like a solid sort of surface. There's a certain not transparency, translucent quality to the paint, so that if there are any sort of aberrations on the surface, or sort of vestiges of time and all those other things. We want those things to show through. We don't want a strictly flat wall on that surface. We want it to have a bit of variation. So again, that it matches the original surfaces that are extant and original, that that it doesn't look like just a patch of brand new paint on there.
Right.
Yeah, and to add to that, that was one of the reasons there's a lot of abrasion in some of this striping. If you can see sort of next to Gianfranco's head over here, you can see on that outer edge, there's a lot of loss, and it was braided either by curtains or by the frame or whatever. Yeah, and so we didn't go back in and just put thick stripes of paint down in there. And in fact, in a lot of the cases, we didn't even, fill in the loss. We kind of left it if it wasn't glaringly, obvious. If it kind of blended into sort of the whole scheme, we just kind of left it, and we were really light-handed with the overpaint in this room compared to other projects. And I think it was the right call when you look at it as a whole right now. Even in those areas where I know that there's loss and it could be toned, I like the decision to leave it and let that be part of what it is now. It looks natural. It doesn't look forced or overworked. I don't think at all.
Which is the attitude we take it throughout all the rooms. When you walk in, everything looks spectacular. But when you get close up to the wall, oh yeah, there's a bunch of abrasion here. It's been around for like 160 years. And that's that balance that you're trying to strike. That visually it makes sense, but yet if you walk up to it, you can see that it's an old surface, which is ideal.
I think there's that wonderful thing about that sense of humility, that you are humble serving the building, but also that you're in a sequence of restorers and conservators over the centuries. We don't have the answer. That we're still humble. As you said with the painting of the ceiling, that you don't have the technology right now, but they may in 100 years. Yeah.
No, we're not the end. We're not the end. We're just a continuum, basic part of that continuum. Yeah, absolutely.
It's neat. Yeah. And there's that roping you were talking about, Siobhan, and how impossible it would be to get the varnishing off without messing up the gold.
Yeah. And unlike some of the gold that was up on the ceiling and in the cove, this gold is really, really, really stable. I didn't find one area of flaking. If there was loss, it was because it got bonked or a piece of furniture crashed in, as you can see, sort of that third rope up. Yep, there's a loss right there, but that's not from the paint failing. That's from human error, I'm guessing. And and we don't go in there and put more gold leaf on or try to re-gild or anything like that. We're actually using some shell gold, which is some gold dust in gum arabic, and we're applying it almost like a watercolor, so that it's gold, but it's not, we're not trying to, put the whole operation back into motion. It would be a lot of loss of gold leaf, and because the part that we would need is just a centimeter, but you have an inch. You have an inch of the leaf, and so most of it would just go away. Would just disappear once you pressed it in. So I love that. Material that Gianfranco has been using. We've been used in all the rooms, I think, now. And it's so fun to use, and it's really effective, and it's quick.
And minimal. That's the important. Effective but minimal in terms of what we're doing.
Very minimal, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And you're looking at overpaint there, right? So when I was speaking before, that's where we would probably take some acetone and we'd remove it. But so underneath it would be that white creamy color, not the yellowed varnished color. And so then we go back in and sort of tone that out to match the yellow afterward.
I didn't see more over here, I think. Yeah, interesting. And then there's that lovely coving detail, and then putting back that sort of piping or trim.
It's just a beaded material with it's actually silver leaf with a glaze on it to make it look like gold. yellow glaze. So it's actually silver leaf, and you can see on the left-hand shot, you can see these little vertical lines, like little cracks in it, towards the right, not that one, no, to the far right, you can actually see them.
Oh yeah, right here.
Yeah, those are little cracks in the gesso, and it's where the varnish has opened up a bit, and so that's tarnishing of the silver is what you're seeing, those dark lines. So that's how you know it's silver leaf with this glazing on it, because it was a cheaper way of, producing this stuff. But then you see on the right-hand side, they're, again, really well preserved. That actually is Siobhan's hand, I believe. Applying some adhesive to reattach it. And they were just attached with the little tiny nails, brads. And in many areas, we would go back in and drill a little pilot hole, because that wood is so brittle now. So drill a fine pilot hole and then insert a nail in there to hold it along with the adhesive. But just making sure that, they don't fall off and we lose them. So yeah, just maintenance basically at that point.
And the difference here in this, in the rail here is just amazing.
Yeah.
Sorry, there we go. Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
And then just
actually, can you go back 1 second? I'm sorry. This is really. So yeah, in fact, you can see the molding below that, the color. So there's an area again that badly damaged by water infiltration, and no matter how much you clean that, it was not going to come back. It's stained right through the paint. So this is an area where again we were able to just go over with a light wash of this toning paint to just make it consistent, and you can see the difference that that makes in terms of the appearance of that gold against it.
Oh yeah, it just makes that pop. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there to.
No. That's
but it's an interesting sort of comparison there.
Yeah, and then here I put these in because Venus and Jupiter, and that's the whole theme, right? This sort of not illicit love, but sort of seduction and so on. And just boy, what a mess. They're in your workshop though in Massachusetts,
yeah, they're with us right now. And so these were painted on canvas, and they were adhered. They were not painted if these were probably not painted in the building. These were probably ordered or commissioned probably by different artists than Guidicini. In any event, they were commissioned, and they're very thinly painted. Some of them are done in oil, some of them are in a water-based paint. They vary throughout the mansion, and it may have to do with whoever was painting them at what given moment. But they were basically adhered with like a wallpaper paste, like a gum or some sort of animal glue. And this one, for whatever reason, whatever materials they were using, has had this real serious problem of the paint flaking off the surface. So this is Siobhan and me a number of years ago removing one of the two big medallions in the room, just inserting spatulas and slowly prying it off. And right now, with this one in particular, we've set down the paint and reattached it, the process of cleaning it. And I believe the next images that you have show, there's a detail on the left which shows that extensive, severe flaking of the paint on the surface, very fragile. So in this case, we introduced adhesive into all those cracks slowly, carefully. It can take quite a few hours to do that. And then in my shop, we have what's called a lining table. It's a vacuum lining table, which warms up. The adhesive that we introduced into the paint is in a solvent. It evaporates the solvent, and then the day after, you can actually apply heat to that, and it helps you to bond the paint back onto the canvas. And the painting that you see on the right here, where Corinne is actually massaging the surface, it's actually under a sheet of thin mylar plastic. There's a vacuum drawn on it, so it's holding everything down. And then just with gentle hand pressure and a pad, cotton pad, sort of rubbing the surface to make sure that all the flakes are being readhered onto the canvas. And then after that's done, it's a question of just going back in and retouching all those losses, that are disturbing on the surface. And once that's done, hopefully in the next few weeks, we will be back in the mansion and reattaching those into the ceiling.
It's gonna be amazing.
Yeah.
And I just popped this in just as a last one because here's another, so it's not fabric, it's not paint, it's now, I guess it's gilded bronze, right? Is this material?
Yes.
It's actually ormolu, is it? It's a kind of a bronzy ormolu, probably is what it is. Yeah. Looks
Yeah.
gilded, but it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. I also like this because people can see, when I'd be telling guests, I'd say, this whole thing about this, illicit love. And there you have these little
Yeah.
cupids
Yeah.
flinging arrows up at Venus and Jupiter. I mean, there's this playfulness, this whimsy that, it's just, there's just so much to see, and it's difficult to see it. So then what remains to be done? Where are we in
In the actual room, in the parlor room, is that what you're asking about?
Yeah.
Not a lot, just minor touch-ups. Once we get the painting, those canvas paintings back up, we will be doing a walkthrough with Tom and Tim, who are at the director, and the Tim is the what is he? He's the
Assistant director.
Sorry, the titles get them all wrong. No, we'll be doing a walkthrough with everybody, and we all step back and have a look, and make sure that everything is looking appropriate, and that that we're satisfied with everything. Again, not trying to push things too much, but if there's any adjustments we need to make, that's the time to make it. And then it's a question of repopulating the room with all its furniture and everything at some point in the future.
Yeah. Wow. So you a 2-year brief, right? And you've basically done it.
Yeah, we're just about there. Yeah.
December, I think, right?
Yeah, we're just about there. Yeah, close enough. Yeah.
Around there. So yeah, I don't think there's a lot left to be done on the walls except reinstalling those paintings. Then it's cleaning that gasolier, which is huge. Those pooty weigh, 30 pounds each. they're huge. And creating a wall-to-wall carpet pad for the Axminster rug, and all of the cornices and frames for the mirrors. Everything else has to be conserved now. So that's the layering that happens when we do all these conservation projects, that we get the walls and ceilings done, and then you've got to add on all the additional layers, which are extremely elaborate. I mean, it'll take another, couple of years probably to get all of that, all of the rest of it sort of situated. So it's a very long process.
Yeah.
And the problem is, of course, that it's amazing. Even with when you think of a lot of the furniture, if the fabrics that are on there now are not original, which they're not typically, if that has to be replicated, that's a time-consuming process. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is that the walls and the ceiling are all stable and restored now, conserved and restored. And so the mansion can then, as it raises funds, as Siobhan's saying, you start dealing with those other layers that helps to bring the room back to as close as possible as we can get it to what the artists intended in their vision of the place. So
in the smoking room, all that fabric was actually remade right in France, where it was originally produced.
Exactly. Yeah, but that's a huge operation in and of itself. Never mind what we've done on artwork. Yeah.
Yeah, and part of that problem is finding the places who can do that. There aren't that many left in the world. It's that's a huge challenge. And another, conservation issue where you think, do we want it to mimic what was there, or does it need to be exact? Does it need to be made out of the same material, or can it be made out of a modern material? How's the light going to affect it? How, it just goes on and on and on. These are discussions that will be had for years to come. And it's a cost thing, and it's an appearance thing. Some fabrics are way more important to look at, like the Turkish room. You couldn't just put any fabric in there or any tassel in there. It all had to be what it was. Whereas when you have sort of a cream silk that goes in the parlor, maybe that's a little easier. Maybe you have it out of a polyester so that the light doesn't damage it quite as quickly. The same sort of things you're going to think about with the walls, you're going to think about with all of those other elements as well.
Yeah. The passementerie, that recreate those. Maybe 3D printing could help with that. I don't know.
That was my idea, actually. And maybe even having sort of a curated event where you have a different artist with a different window, and they do a different way of how they're going to replicate or reproduce those beautiful, the passementerie, the valance is those huge silk wire wrapped flowers. And I think it would be really interesting to see someone do it in paper, and somebody do it in 3D printing would be amazing. And dried flower, whatever it is, whatever creative. Because when we researched those to see how much they'd cost to have them reproduced in France, I think it was something like $250,000 a window. So there's 6 windows in there, and that's just for the silk flowers.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Well, maybe Santa Claus can come and deliver some. Oh, well, this has been actually mind-blowingly wonderful. At Waynfield, I also taught art history for 8 years, so I'm sort of feeling I'm having this nerd fest. So thank you both really so much for taking this time to share all this information with the docents and also the people the visitors who want to know what have you been doing, and getting these close-ups has been really fantastic. So thank you both really very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, anytime.
So I'm going to just